Okay, 11th, 12th grade, we're going to finish up chapter 29 right now. I had a little talk with Mr. S last night. He told me absolutely no lectures after today. So because I said I was going to finish the lectures, I'm going to do my very best to finish my lectures today, which means marathon for me. You are not required to watch them. You are not required to finish all of the notes in your packets. The only thing you're being graded on are your homeworks in the packets. You do need to finish the packets, which means you have to read and answer the questions and homework. But I made a commitment to finish this, so I'm going to. That's just the way it is. But it's totally up to you whether or not you want to watch. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start on number 96 in chapter 29. Jimmy Carter was pushing for the United States to get away from dependency on imported oil, but instead of focusing on domestic oil production, instead he wanted to encourage the development of solar energy, which on paper sounds really great, but in reality is incredibly expensive. It is absolutely one of the most expensive ways for energy to be produced because you need special equipment for that energy to be produced, and you don't always have as much energy gained as what you've put into the equipment itself. So overall, it's very, very expensive, especially during the 1970s when it was brand new. Usually new technology is a lot more expensive than it is after it has been perfected, but it takes the expensive prototype to eventually make a less expensive average Joe tech product. So he was the first president to put solar panels on the White House. They were incredibly inefficient. They really didn't add to a lot of, stopping the power usage. It kind of helped with the power usage in the White House, but not to a great extent. The majority of the White House was still running on like coal energy, converted to electricity. So he was the first president to put them on. The very next president took them off because they were so inefficient, incredibly heavy. And he was trying to encourage the people of the United States to pay out money for the development and research for solar energy. Here's the problem with that. That puts the government in charge of business. The only way we're going to have truly great research and development and low-cost, energy-efficient solar panels is if the private market starts to really embrace that and starts to make those panels. The reason that has been a problem on the private market for so long is because they are so inefficient and so expensive to make. There's not enough profit margin there. So a lot of solar places will actually get government funding to help them, even though they're supposed to be a private company. So again, they're going to have a lot more expense because when people start getting money from the government, prices go up every single time, and people don't seem to make that connection. The only energy source that is more expensive overall than solar is actually wind power. We have wind turbines out in our desert right here. We should have like almost zero energy costs on our power bills. Ask your parents how much their power bills go up to in the summertime. We are not getting the benefit of that wind farm. We are not, even though the city of Banning actually helped to pay to have that built. We are not getting the benefit for it. So when you come down to brass tacks, when you come down to the real life world, these are not really efficient energy practices. Okay, atomic power is incredibly efficient. Fact is. Okay, so they offered a solution to the energy problem, but environmentalists, all they heard was atomic energy. They lost their minds. Oh my goodness, everybody's hair is going to fall out. Everybody's going to get cancer. Life is going to end as we know it. So they protested against nuclear energy, despite the fact that nuclear energy does use uranium, but it doesn't use the same kind of uranium that is found in nuclear weapons. It's not weaponized uranium. It's not enriched uranium. So you have environmental groups opposing nuclear development at all costs, and the nuclear development is primarily government development here. And then they felt like they got their message across when, in 1979, there was an accident at a nuclear power plant at 3 Mile Island. This gave environmentalists the support they were looking for. And they just went on and on about the horrible accident at 3 Mile Island. Oh my goodness, this is horrible. I'm going to read you the little sign. You ready? Nuclear accident at 3 Mile Island. March 28th, 1979, and for several days thereafter, as a result of a technical malfunction and human error, 3 Mile Island's Unit 2 nuclear generating station was the scene of the nation's worst commercial nuclear accident. Radiation was released. A part of the nuclear core was damaged, and thousands of residents evacuated the area. Events here would cause basic changes throughout the world's nuclear power energy. So because of the accident, the worst accident ever in the United States when it came to nuclear energy, a lot of changes were made in the nuclear power industry. Here's the crux, though. It was the worst accident. There was no injury. There were no deaths. That was the worst accident. So, yeah, people will say, remember the people who died at 3 Mile Island. It's like, nobody died at 3 Mile Island. No. Part of the plant was contaminated with radioactive material, and the entire facility was closed down as a result. However, there have been no effect on the cancer rates in the surrounding area. So it closed down and is now just part of our popular culture. 3 Mile Island, ooh, be scared of the radiation, and yet it really didn't have any effect whatsoever. Except for it did make a really great scene in Wolverine. That was pretty awesome. I don't think it was called Wolverine, though. It was the first Wolverine movie, though. That when he goes up against Deadpool at the very end, 3 Mile Island, quite good. Yeah, I like that stuff. Okay, under President Carter, the government continued to print more money to pay for social welfare programs. We were in a recession. We had an energy crisis, and the idea behind government was just print more money and we will get rid of our horrible recession that we're in right now. They wanted to pay more money for social welfare programs. Why did they need more money for social welfare programs? Let's travel back in time, shall we? People were getting unemployment, which they pay into actually, but they were also applying for food stamps. That's a social welfare program. They were applying for Medicaid, which is a social welfare program. They were trying to get more. They were actually applying for welfare, that's a social welfare program. But why were they doing all that? Because they got fired from their jobs because the tax rate increased because of the energy problem. Okay, so we are seeing this like demonic hamster wheel of economics that for some reason there's about 60% of our country who don't understand basic economics. They don't put together that when you raise taxes, unemployment and prices go up. They just can't put the things together at all. Okay, in 1979, in South America, we had a group of Sandinistas overthrew the dictatorship of Anastasio Somoza in Nicaragua. So the Sandinistas were fighting against a dictatorship. Once the Sandinistas were in power, they had taken out the dictatorship, but that caused a rift in governmental change, which means there's a power vacuum that has to be filled. So once the Sandinistas were in power, the United States urged them to allow free elections and set up a democratic government. But before they could do that, the communists seized control and eliminated all of the conservative Sandinistas. Eliminated is that politically correct communist word that means executed. In 1979, President Carter announced the signing of the SALT II agreement. This was an attempt to establish equality in missile systems between the United States and USSR. If you're feeling that sense of deja vu, there's a reason for it. Yep, we're signing yet another agreement with USSR saying, we'll stop making weapons if you stop making weapons. And then what usually happens? The USSR continues to make weapons. Then in 1979, a revolution deposed the anti-communist Shah of Iran. He was anti-communist, and his country was actually probably the most developed country in the Middle East. He was in Iran, very developed country. In fact, this is what Iran looked like during the Shah's time. Here's what happens, though. You have people who are living in an extremely developed country. They're getting educations. Men and women have equal rights. Women are doctors, lawyers, teachers. Everybody gets a chance to go to school if they want to. Science has been made a really important study for students. The STEM research was off the hook. People were pretty happy. And yet, though they had everything going for them, they still weren't content the way they should have been, to the point where they looked at their lives and they said, you know what, there's still something, maybe something else could be better. And that's when you have people starting to talk about the benefits of communism. Well, we can shop wherever we want, yes, but some people can't shop in that nice store. Some people can. I've never really shopped in big fancy stores. I mean, I probably at this point in my life, I shop at probably the most expensive store I've ever shopped at. It's at the mall. So it's not like I'm going to Rodeo Drive or anything. But yeah, the idea was still being implemented that there's some people who are poor. So we need to take money away from the wealthy and redistribute it among the poorest people. And they added to that a religious tradition that was pretty popular in the Middle East, that of Islam. The Shah was pretty, I mean, he was Islamic. He followed the religion, but there was nothing really in Islam that required women to wear scarves and, you know, the gowns and everything else. So he had no problem with women dressing the way they thought they should. Okay. So people had a sense of freedom in this country. But it wasn't enough. And they started pushing for communism. They wanted communism, despite the fact that they had all of this freedom. They got it. As soon as they overthrew the Shah, a religious leader took his place. He filled that power vacuum and immediately began to pass laws with a group of what we would think of as elders. Immediately, the legal marrying age of a woman was lowered to the age of 9 because that was in accordance with Islamic law. In 1981, the Islamic law of retribution was reinstated, allowing the crime of adultery to be punished by stoning to death. The Ayatollah Khomeini, he was that religious leader that filled the power vacuum, stated that women's honor needed to be preserved. Oh, he's going to honor women. He's going to honor them by making sure they have zero freedom. For their own good, women appearing in public were to be accompanied by a male relative at all times and to be able to provide proof of the relationship. Any contact with non-related men could result in legal punishment. Segregation of the sexes was imposed across all aspects of Iranian life. In public transportation, women were required by law to sit in the back of the bus, as the front seats were reserved for male passengers only. A woman's testimony was legally reduced to half of that as a man's. Family planning was cast by the new regime as a Western conspiracy to weaken Iran. Women lost all access to those vital health services. And we're not talking about abortion here. We're talking about birth control and basic gynecological health. All nurseries were closed. Those are daycares. Decried as a Western conspiracy to deprive children of motherly love and Islamic upbringing. They strictly enforced the dress code. You notice the dress has changed quite a lot. New laws were passed banning Western clothing and requiring that women remain completely recovered by traditional Islamic hijab, in public at all times. No hair could be visible, no open-toed shoes. A special government agency was created to enforce the moral dress code. A government agency was created to enforce the dress code. Prevention of vice and enjoining a virtue center dealt exclusively with women found to be in violation of the dress code in any way. You notice how the preponderance of the laws are on the women. New laws were passed banning Western clothing. Oh, I already did that one. So let's go. Military training of Revolutionary Guards was expanded to include spotting imperfections of the dress code and policing women. Even laughing too loudly or enthusiastically was considered immodest and could put an erring female in danger of legal punishment or worse. You notice as this goes on, the crowds have fewer and fewer women in them. Turns out the Ayatollah Khomeini when he was encouraging women to take an active role in the revolution to bring communism to their country, he led them to expect that he was going to expand their rights and equality with men. And they're the ones who helped him get his prominence as a religious leader and as a leader of the country. So he used the women to gain his power and then turned around and took all of their power away. It is in microcosm exactly how communism works. Everybody will share. Everybody will have the power. Everybody will have a voice. Everybody. Now that I'm in charge, you get nothing. You are all my slaves. Women were deeply disappointed. They opposed the repeal of the family protection laws, the strictly enforced dress code, as well as educational and vocational restrictions. Women were no longer allowed to finish their education, and there were certain jobs they weren't allowed to have, like doctors, lawyers, scientists, teachers. So women, at first, staged various protests during the tumultuous time. In one spontaneous uprising, Iranian women and men took to the streets en masse to protest the compulsory hijab and to call for the protection of achievements made in women's rights. They didn't win. Iranian rebels under the Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, a Muslim religious leader who is now the leader of the country, started to push even further. They captured the American embassy in Tehran. And we've talked about what it means when a country invades an American embassy. Anytime an embassy is built on foreign soil, where the embassy is considered part of their home country. So the Chinese embassy in the United States is considered China when you walk into that embassy. Any kind of attack on an embassy on foreign soil is seen as an act of war on the entire country it came from. The Ayatollah Khomeini attacked the American embassy. He declared war on all of America by attacking the embassy. He took American diplomatic personnel hostage. Diplomats have something called diplomatic immunity. It's supposed to be set up for mistakes that a person might make in another country without foreknowledge. Okay, it's not to protect them from gross crimes and misdemeanors. It's supposed to allow them to have a chance to, get into the momentum of how to live their life in a foreign country. So they have that diplomatic immunity, which keeps them from getting arrested or tried for a crime that they may have committed without foreknowledge. That is not what happened. They didn't arrest the American diplomatic personnel. It's not like they just ignored the diplomatic immunity. They took them hostage. They kidnapped them. They committed a crime against American diplomatic personnel who were supposed to be protected. They attacked the American embassy, which was American soil located in Iran. They declared war. President Carter and the Congress failed to help the Shah restore his government. They failed to secure the release of the American hostages. They failed in a big way. But President Carter is going to continue on his route to what he sees as a way to make peace. He tried to make peace with Central America by offering back the Panama Canal. Now he wants to try to make peace in the Middle East. Okay, not in Iran, not rescuing our men, but peace in the Middle East between Egypt and Israel. So he encouraged the leader of Egypt, Anwar Sadat, and the Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin to come to Camp David. Camp David, originally called Shangri-La, is a campground somewhere in Maryland. Nobody really knows the location because it's kept specifically secret for the president's use. It was named Camp David by Dwight D. Eisenhower after his grandson. But this is a place where the president's supposed to be able to work, and it's like a work retreat kind of thing. So we invited these two men to Camp David and had them sit down and talk to each other in the same room. And the three of them actually came to an accord or a peace treaty between these two countries. For the first time in 2,000 years, Jews and Arabs sat down together and negotiated a peace treaty. That was pretty remarkable. So when we talk about presidents, we have to talk about the good and the bad. This was amazing that Carter could do this because he was just an incredible failure in so many ways. But in this, he actually got these two to sit down together. The people in Panama don't think he was a failure because they got, a free canal out of it. But in the American eyes, we're looking at this and saying, okay, well, that's pretty miraculous that you got these two guys to sit down together. You couldn't get the Shah of Iran back in power. You couldn't rescue our hostages. But hey, we'll give you props for this. Good job. Way to go. The thing was, it wasn't just Americans who really didn't care for Carter. Most of the world didn't either. In fact, Ayatollah Khomeini called him the White Devil every chance he got. The Nobel Peace Prize Committee also overlooked him because they gave the Nobel Peace Prize for that year to Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin for their working together to create this peace treaty. They totally ghosted Jimmy Carter, who put it all together. He didn't win. Okay, when we talk about communism and I'm like the voice in the wind telling you it's bad, it's bad, it's bad, because I know some of you are going to go on to college and you're going to hear nothing but it's good, it's good, it's good. I hope you remember some of the practical steps I've tried to share with you that people who have been in communist countries will tell you flat out it's really horrible. It's not what people are saying it is. One of the guys who escaped from a communist country, from the big communist country, Russia, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, was a Russian writer. He was deported from the Soviet Union for opposing communism through his writings. And he came to live in the United States in 1976. Now, he was actually in prison. You can see he's in his prison uniform there for writing a letter to a friend saying that he didn't really agree with one of Stalin's policies. That was enough to put him in prison for many, many years. While he was in prison, and he was changed from gulag to gulag to gulag, he kind of took mental notes and sometimes physical notes about what he was going through. And he put it all together in a book called The Gulag Archipelago. That's a chain of prisons. When asked why the evil system of communism was in the world today, he replied, "Men have forgotten God. That's why all this has happened." It's that simple. Evil makes its home in the individual human heart before it enters a political system. So he was looking at the evil of the people who brought communism into Russia and the people who are leading communist nations and says, they all have one thing in common, folks: evil. He said, atheist teachers in the West, that's where we are bringing up a younger generation in a spirit of hatred of their own society. He said that in the 70s. It's still true today. All attempts to find a way out of the plight of today's world are fruitless unless we direct our consciousness in repentance to the Creator of all. He has his finger right on the pulse. He's saying exactly what needs to happen. We need to turn our lives over to Christ and live according to His will and His word, not according to somebody's political aspirations. And I believe, yep, that was it. Okay, we still have 20 minutes left in this segment, so I'm going to quickly switch us over to our very next chapter, chapter 23, and hopefully it will pop up. Yeah, chapter 23, right. Chapter 30. I said 23. We are getting close to the end. Okay. Jimmy Carter, when he was up for re-election, people were like, no way. Okay, so the next person to run on the Republican ticket was Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan had a long history in front of the American public. Okay, did a little cheerleading in college, did a little football. I don't think he did football. I think he just did cheerleading. But he was an actor in Hollywood. He didn't just act in movies, but he also did television shows. So almost everybody knew who he was. He also became the head of the Screen Actors Guild during the time of the HUAC, trying to blacklist people who were communists. And then he became governor of California. So this is a guy who had a long history in front of cameras. He knew what he was doing. he was chosen to run against President Jimmy Carter. Now, he had run before, but it was against Nixon. And Nixon was very, very well known and very popular at the time. And people looked at Reagan and said, you're just an actor. What do you know? So he got a little more political stuff under his belt and then re-ran again. Now that people really hated Nixon, they're like, you know what? You would probably be really good. So they ran him against Jimmy Carter. And one of the big things was the hostage factor. You can see that little corner there. Oh, yeah. And there was John Anderson, too. Ran on a third ticket. He got almost no votes. Big shock. The hostage factor. Jimmy Carter's like, there is nothing we can do. We have tried to negotiate. They don't want to negotiate. I don't know what else there is to do. Ronald Reagan, they asked him the same question. What are you going to do about the hostage situation? He said, as soon as I'm sworn in, we bomb Iran. That's it. They even made a novelty song about it called Bomb Iran. Yeah. To the tune of Barbara Ann. So that was his plan. As soon as I'm sworn in, I'm bombing Iran. They declared war on us. I'm going to return the favor best I can. You know, he's not going to go to Congress and ask for a declaration of war. He's just going to bomb them long enough to get the hostages out. So he told the people he wanted to return America to her traditional values. He wanted to restore military strength at home and abroad, which is why he said this is why we ended up having our embassy taken over in the first place, because we have become so weak militarily. So let's stop doing that. Let's get our people safely home. I was actually living in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba at the time of the hostage crisis. And the people on the base, because I lived on the base in Gitmo, the people on the base were really, really concerned because it was really obvious that the reason the embassy was taken over was because the U.S. military looked weak in the eyes of the world. And the base in Gitmo was sharing an island with a communist government. And it was like, are we next? Are we going to get attacked? What's going on? There was a lot of preparation just in case something happened. Every year on the base anyway, they have this, what they call DEFX drill, where they actually go through a drill as if we're being attacked and people have to stay in their homes, no lights, the whole schmeal. But people in Cuba at the time, I remember, were just like, they were angry at Carter for not standing up for the military, for not strengthening the military. They were angry at him. And then when Reagan made that statement, first thing I'm going to do is bomb Iran, it was like everybody was like, good. Okay, it was one of those issues. So the idea that this president wanted to restore military strength at home and abroad, people who were in the military appreciated having a president who would be respectful of their sacrifice and their time. I mean, people spending time away from families, they're putting their lives on the line to protect the United States. They want a commander-in-chief who sees that and says, I acknowledge that and I respect it. Okay, whoops, gotta go on this side and boom. Okay, the Great Communicator. This was a name given to Ronald Reagan because he was an effective public speaker when he had a script. Okay? When he was asked off-the-cuff questions, he sometimes did really great and sometimes didn't. He had a really bad habit of going, and it wasn't like he would shake his head and go, well. But he was doing that to kind of get some time to think of the right answer, what he really wanted to say. If he hadn't done the he probably wouldn't have been made fun of as much as he was. But when it came to being on stage, he was a natural. Of course he was. He was trained. Okay? He was a trained actor. So people looked at him and they said, he's got great speaking ability. So they called him the Great Communicator. Of course, some of the stuff he said, and people got really upset about, like when he said, first thing I'm going to do is bomb Iran. People in the newspaper business just went absolutely crazy. Oh my goodness, he's threatening war. People who were upset about the hostage crisis said, well, they declared war on us. Hello. He also did a mic check one time, a mic check, which means he's not supposed to be on the air at all. They're just getting sound levels for his voice. And he said, this is the president of the United States and we will commence bombing Russia in 30 minutes, something like that. And everybody was like, he said it was a mic check. It was a joke, but people lost their ever loving minds. Okay. Conservative political action groups of the 1980s encouraged people to vote to return to traditional values. They're not trying to take things away from people so much. They're looking for a return to respect of traditional values. The largest PAC of the 1980s was the Moral Majority. And the head of that was Jerry Falwell, who was a pastor at a Virginia church called Liberty Baptist. They say he should be given at least partial credit for turning millions of politically apathetic Americans into a lasting force. Because the reason we had been in such a nosedive politically was pastors and churches were actually teaching people that voting wasn't important, that because God was in control, they didn't need to vote. Sometimes it was even a sin to vote, which is just mind-boggling. But the Moral Majority, this very large PAC, and Jerry Falwell were like, hey, Christians, God gave you the right to vote. It's in the Constitution. You're in a country where you have that right. He's provided it. How about you use it for the good? And you have to remember, this is a time when capital punishment was repealed and abortion was allowed. It was legislated. So yeah, we had gotten on the wrong side of the moral compass there. Okay, Phyllis Schlafly. She was a constitutional lawyer and she backed Ronald Reagan for president. There is right now a Netflix original miniseries about her, and her daughter said it is all completely false. And it's not just false on Phyllis Schlafly's side because she was a conservative. You expect Netflix, which is an extremely liberal, group. I mean, they're in the media. They're going to be liberal. She says, I expect that from them against my mom, making her look like she cared more about her looks than about, life, that she was in an abusive relationship. She wasn't, that she was only concerned about propping up men and didn't really care about women. And this woman is a constitutional lawyer, for crying out loud. That means she went to school for probably 8 to 10 years to get her law degree in constitutional law, which means she's a specialist. She's not a frowsy, I can't leave my house because my husband doesn't want me to person. Okay? It's not that at all. There are women who dedicate their lives to running a home and raising a family, and they are to be honored for that. They should not be made fun of, and they should not be made to feel like they're stupid for their choice, because a lot of these women are frankly not stupid. They're incredibly intelligent. They've just made that choice. Phyllis Schlafly was being presented as some kind of mousy, abused, little scared of her own shadow woman who puts on this persona of, yes, I'm strong, when she's in the limelight. She was strong all the time. She was a constitutional lawyer. I just don't understand why women who call themselves feminist would bash this woman for standing up and saying, you know what? I disagree with your political point of view. I'm going to go with my political point of view. I can be just as strong on my side as you can on your side. I just don't agree with you. But instead of saying we don't agree with your politics, they bashed her for her looks and for her jobs. Well, they didn't talk about her real job, and for her political stance. At the age of 69, Ronald Reagan was the oldest man to be elected president of the United States. Oh, I was going to tell you, Phyllis Schlafly's daughter said she's not just concerned about the way they badly portrayed her mom, but also the way they badly portrayed her mom's basically foe, Gloria Steinem. The two of them would fight in the media. And she says they don't treat Gloria Steinem very well either in that movie, in that supposed biopic. She's like, when is Gloria Steinem going to stand up and say, hey, what was that about? Why did you treat me that way in that? But anyway, age of 69, Ronald Reagan, oldest man to be elected president of the United States. So you have an actor who spent all of his time on stage in front of people, and standing next to him, generally the vice president is someone who's really kind of opposite of what the president is. This is the former head of the CIA. So he ran spy networks. That was his whole job. For years, he was the head of the CIA. So a guy who was on in front of the cameras all the time versus a guy who, told spies how to spy. The same day that Reagan was inaugurated, the 52 hostages in Tehran, Iran were released after 440 days of captivity. Reagan didn't have to drop any bombs. Just his threat and the knowledge that his threat was accurate and meaningful was enough to make the Iranian government release the hostages. They recognized his strength where they were making fun. They mocked Carter's weakness. So Reagan had promised to use military action to free them, didn't need to. His strength was enough to make the rest of the world back down. Okay? Iran said, we're just going to release them. It's fine. And everybody went, finally, we have a strong person in the White House. Now, Jimmy Carter ended up becoming a fairly good guy. I mean, he was a good guy deep down inside. He just wasn't a very good president. Even now, he's really old. He's in his 90s, but he still works for Habitat for Humanity. That became his charitable cause that he really promoted. And he has hands-on built houses for the poor in the United States. If that's what you want to do, I think that's awesome. That was fantastic. He just wasn't a good president. You can be a good leader and not a good person. And you can be a good person but not a good leader. It's best if we have someone who's both, though, as president. Ronald Reagan was the first president since Dwight Eisenhower to serve 2 4-year terms. This is his wife, Nancy. They met because she was accused of being a communist, and she went to the Screen Actors Guild to him and said, I want to protest this accusation because I am in no way a communist. And he said, I believe you. He tore up the complaint and then asked her out to dinner. The little seat that they sat in on their first date is now sitting in the president's library here in California. President Reagan's library is here in California. Okay, Margaret Thatcher. She was the conservative prime minister of England. She and Reagan shared the same vision of strong traditional values, limited government, and strength against communism. And both of them are going to be attacked by the liberal press the entire time they're in office, despite the fact that people become wealthier, fewer people are on government assistance, that more businesses are started, and there are fewer attacks on their nations at the time when they are in power. In fact, Margaret Thatcher, as soon as she came into power in Great Britain, there was almost an immediate attack on one of England's territories, and she sent the people who attacked it thought for sure that she was going to let it fly because she's a woman. I mean, how strong could she be? She immediately went and rescued that territory and shipped all the people who were attacking back home. She had no time for that. And she showed her strength immediately. Okay, Thomas Sowell. God bless him. He's actually quite fun to follow on Facebook. I haven't heard from him in a while, though, so he may have stopped Facebook. He's getting older. But he's a brilliant black economist of the late 20th century. He effectively argued that careless welfare programs hurt ethnic minorities by destroying the family and the work ethic in inner cities. Yep, he came out and said it. You see, the liberal media and politicians were saying things like, okay, people in the inner city, primarily black people in the inner city, cannot take care of themselves, so the government should take care of them for them. They should be taken care of by the government because they can't take care of themselves. They are in poverty. Sowell is saying, excuse me? What are you saying? You saying that just because I'm black, I can't take care of myself? Well, yeah, that's what they were saying. But he was saying, look at some of the policies you're using when people are on welfare. You tell a married couple with kids that they can go on welfare, but if the woman was single with kids, she would make more money than if she was married. So they end up getting divorced. The woman becomes a single mom. The dad goes on to live somewhere else. The family has been broken apart so they can get a bigger paycheck from Uncle Sam. He says, That's stupid. And the fact that you are giving people money without having to do anything, no drug testing, no actual work that they have to do, you're destroying the work ethic. People are like, what's the point of working when I can just get free money from the government? You are causing the problem, he's telling the government. And then he said this, riskier mortgage lending practices when people can't prove that they can pay a mortgage back, but the government is basically compelling banks to be more lenient on their mortgage practices. Riskier mortgage lending practices imposed by government were what set the stage for financial disasters that followed. He's like, look, you make a housing bubble, you make it easier for people who can't really afford a mortgage to afford a mortgage, and then you're creating this huge bubble. It's not going to be sustainable when that pops, when that starts to dive. The people who really can't pay that mortgage back are going to lose their homes. And that's exactly what happens. Really smart. Reaganomics. Oh, he's going to step on every toe in Washington. Every toe. Yeah. Okay. During the time of FDR, they started following a thing called Keynesian economic theory, which means that it was a good thing for a government to live on credit, to live in debt, and then just raise taxes and then send that money out. And it didn't matter if you didn't take in as much money as you spent, because eventually the money would come around. On what fantasy planet did that come from? So Reagan is like, we're not going to follow that anymore because that's just put us into recession after recession, a really long recession. And he says now he inherited this recession, a big one, a bad one. And he said, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to balance the budget. How dare you? Our money supply should be stable. Now, a lot of people thought we should go back to being backed by gold, but by this time we had too large a population, too little gold, and too much inflation to make that practical or practicable. He said that trade and business should be free from government regulation. But that's how some of us make our money, is by creating regulations that we force other people to pay. That's what they did. That's what politicians in Washington did. They'd say, okay, you have to be inspected on this specific date, and then you have to pay to be inspected, and then we get that pay. Yeah. We made up something where you have to pay a fee or, an inspection fee or whatever. The federal government had a budget deficit because it spent more money than it received in taxes. And then they ended up borrowing money to cover the difference. How did they borrow money? They borrowed money from the American people with T-bills. And then they borrowed money from local banks. And then they started borrowing money from foreign nations. Oh, that's not a good look. No. So a deficit spending occurs when expenses exceed income. During the Carter years, the government continued to print more and more money to meet its obligations, but that caused inflation to soar and unemployment increased. Do you see how that's connected? If you learn nothing else, see those connections. After 12 years of deficits in a row, the United States had a huge national debt, and that was the total amount owed from past deficits. Today, people will say, well, our deficit went up more with Reagan than anybody else in history. Yeah, because there's interest rates you have to pay, you morons. Did he increase the budget for military? Yes. Why? Because we were actually attacked, people. So when we talk about those yearly there were 12 years in a row of deficit. This guy inherited it, and then he gets the blame for it. 12 years. So Reagan convinced Congress to enact the largest tax cut in American history, 25% over a 3-year period. Now, the left side of the aisle is going to say, you can't cut taxes. That's just going to make the deficit worse. Reagan is like, no, because I understand basic economics, it will not. You see, if you take the tax money that you've illegally taken from the American people and you give it back to the American people, what are they going to do with that money? They're going to spend it, and then you'll get the tax money from that money that was spent. In the form of groceries, houses, cars. Okay. Because the average American had more money to spend as a result of those tax cuts, the economy began to grow. Oh, more jobs were created. Oh, by the end of 1982, unemployment had dropped from 11% to 5%. This is what happens every single time taxes are cut. This is what happens every single time taxes are cut. Every time. Federalism. We are a federalist nation, and we'll talk about that after a quick break. So you take a quick break. I'm going to take a quick break, and then we're going to continue our U.S. History Marathon.